Welcome back. It's Thursday, February 20, and today we have an increasing number of tropical threats across Western and Eastern Australia, including the high probabilities of two tropical cyclones developing on either side of the country over the next couple of days, potentially over this weekend, as well as severe thunderstorms that tore through the Perth Hills yesterday afternoon. Starting off from yesterday, we had a number of severe thunderstorms impact the Perth metro area as they tracked over the Perth Hills Suburbs. Now we can see here from the radar loop from yesterday, we had thunderstorms develop to the northeast of Perth, particularly through the Midwest Gascoyne areas around or just north of the Moora/Watheroo area. Now, as the afternoon progressed over the course of about 1 to 2 hours, they began to track over the Darling Range and Darling Scarp down towards the Perth metro suburbs of Mundaring and Gidgegannup. Now, we can see by around 6 p.m. a number of cells pushing towards these Perth Hills suburbs. We have this large mass of sort of very disorganized thunderstorms and more so heavy rainfall, but a significant number of lightning strikes were actually recorded within this mass. But the cell that we need to pay most attention to from yesterday is this one on the left here that begins to track over Gidgegannup. So if we just freeze the radar loop, we can see as it tracked over the Chidlow, Suez Valley and Gidgegannup suburbs, this is actually our supercell in question that produced a huge amount of damage across the Chidlow and Suez Valley areas. Now, some of the damage actually includes downed power lines, trees, property damage, and a significant number of road closures and power outages. This is our supercell. Now, the surrounding environment of the day was actually particularly weak in terms of instability or thunderstorm juice, with Cape only about 600 to 700 joules per kilogram, which is fairly weak in terms of supercell development. However, the wind shear was also particularly strong, which allowed for the tilting of the updraft and the sustainment of this thunderstorm. But if we pay really close attention here on this radar loop, we can see as it approaches the Perth Hills suburbs where it began to do most of the damage, just through here we have the sea breeze boundary, and we can see it impacting the thunderstorm here as it moves through in the radar loop. Now, what's likely happened here is we have the sea breeze boundary pushing in from the ocean, and of course, being from the ocean, it carries moisture in nature. Now, when a thunderstorm is able to access increased moisture, generally the strength of the thunderstorm can increase, and as this sea breeze boundary intersects the supercell thunderstorm tracking south over the Perth Hills, it's increased the moisture feed to the thunderstorm where the updraft has increased in strength. You can see that here in the radar loop where the thunderstorm rapidly increases in reflectivity colors, where the hail core rapidly expands essentially upon meeting the sea breeze boundary. Now, if we switch to the velocity loop to get an idea of the wind strength, we can also see just as it meets the sea breeze boundary, the outflow velocity really increases with this thunderstorm. A number of tornado reports were actually encountered with this system as it tracked over the Perth Hills. However, this is actually very unlikely to be anything tornadic related due to the high based nature of this thunderstorm, where the base of the thunderstorm was essentially 3 kilometers above the ground level, which makes any tornado forming very difficult between the ground and the cloud. We can also see on this radar loop here, just as the thunderstorm crosses the sort of Chidlow, Mount Helena area, we have what appears to be a velocity couplet and may actually catch people off guard. However, this is not actually a velocity couplet. This is side load contamination within the thunderstorm, where the radar beam is actually measuring what's going on aloft as opposed to what is actually occurring at the ground with the interaction between hail and other objects within the cloud. That being said, the storm was certainly rotating itself, being a supercell with a sustained rotating updraft. However, the updraft was definitely not producing a tornado, nor was it close enough to the ground to produce a tornado, or in terms of its strength, definitely not strong enough to be able to produce a tornado. However, if we pull up this video that we were sent by a viewer, we can see the storm developing the mesocyclone, where the clouds are definitely rotating in a clockwise direction for a supercell, and we can see them wrapping around here to the left and then right again, which is actually very cool footage. If you don't currently follow us, head over to our Twitter or Facebook page and send us any storm reports that you might have to feature. If we pull up further pics and videos, we can see that the extent of the damage is actually quite widespread and certainly significant. Lots of trees down, lots of power lines down, and even property damage. Certainly power outages still ongoing ongoing, and we can see really the wind strength here in this video, just how powerful it really was. In fact, we've got trees coming down as we watch this in real time. A severe thunderstorm warning was issued for this system for damaging winds, but certainly here in this video we can see that the winds are likely much stronger than that, likely pushing the 120 km/h destructive wind threshold, if not exceeding that in wind gust strength. Now this really just goes to show how unpredictable these organized thunderstorms can be and how rapidly they can evolve in nature. Now turning our attention to the main point of the video, where we have an emerging threat of tropical systems developing both in the west and east of the country, jumping straight into Queensland and pulling up our European model on the 850 millibar wind speed. We can see as we drag this out through to around the next couple of days, we have a system rapidly developing to the northeast of Queensland, just east of the sort of Cairns and Townsville area. And we can see as we continue to drag this out through a number of hours, the system appears slightly disorganized and certainly shifts away from the coastal areas. Now, as this continues to drag out, we can see there's some sort of lack of surety about what's currently occurring here. We have a very broad field of increasing wind strength around what would be a tropical low at this point. And we can see as we continue to drag this out through a number of further hours, which of course decrease in confidence, but we can see this model indicates that after a number of days, after the next week or so, we can see it sort of plays around in the Coral Sea area, potentially a little bit further south around the Queensland coastline, and then eventually it sort of wraps itself up to the very end of the extent of the model before making a sort of landfall potentially around perhaps the Bundaberg area. Now, given that this is so far out in the model run, there is a lot of uncertainty regarding this, but certainly there is a good consensus that within the next couple of days we will certainly see a tropical low develop within the Coral Sea. In fact, BOM introducing high probabilities of a tropical cyclone development within the next couple of days. In fact, by Monday, around a 60% chance of developing into a tropical cyclone. Now, from then on, it's uncertain, and there is a range of scenarios as to what happens from then on, but certainly one to watch, with this model indicating that the system is very erratic and unpredictable and sort of plays around in that warm water off the Coral Sea, and then eventually perhaps wrapping itself up into a fully developed tropical cyclone over the next possibly 2 weeks or so. If we compare this to the GFS, actually there is a similar solution to what the European model was saying. We can see this cyclone sort of dancing around and playing around in the warmer waters of the Coral Sea in a sort of northeasterly track before completing this similar curve in down the southern coastline toward what would be the sort of Bundaberg area before completing a landfall as what would be maybe a weak tropical cyclone. Now, of course, once again, still very far out in the forecast hours here, so there is a complete lack of confidence and available data to actually assume this could happen. But certainly, given that they are both indicating a similar outcome, it will definitely be one to watch for what could happen over the next couple of weeks after we have a system develop and then dance around in the warm waters. Switching to Western Australia along this northern Kimberley coastline, we can see that we have a tropical system evidently developing here on the European model, and if we continue to drag this out through the next couple of days, we can see that this system definitely ramps up into what will be a tropical cyclone likely within the next 3 to 4 days. In fact, Bureau Meteorology has outlined this as a 60% chance, which is a high probability of developing into a tropical cyclone by as early as Sunday, so just over a couple of days, 3 or 4 days from now. Now we can see as we drag this out, this system actually becomes quite a robust, powerful system, potentially reaching a severe strength. And we can see that as we drag this out through the forecast hours, it assumes sort of a southwesterly track along the northern coastline of, or well off the northern coastline of Western Australia, certainly far off the northern extent of that sort of Exmouth Gulf tip here. But then as we continue to drag this out, it certainly curves back in toward the Western Australian coastline by around sometime possibly late next week. And if we continue to drag this out, we can see it rapidly disintegrates as a system and obviously weakens very rapidly, given that the water cools off dramatically the further south you go. And then we can see it curving back in potentially around the sort of Perth Metro, maybe a little bit further north through the Midwest areas, but likely as a very weak low system. Now, if we switch to the GFS, we can see that the GFS also picks up on this system developing and tracking down the northern coastline of Western Australia before developing into a tropical system. And we can see that it also indicates this sort of track to the western extent before curving back in towards the southwestern parts of Western Australia, but certainly as a very low system weakening in the cooler waters. For now, that's pretty much going to wrap up today's video. We've covered off on the severe thunderstorms that occurred yesterday and tore through the Perth Hills, as well as 2 tropical cyclones that may potentially develop over the next 3 to 4 days. We'll certainly keep an eye on these, as they are definitely fairly unpredictable at this stage, and there's still a lot of uncertainty, but it does appear probable that within the next 3 or 4 days, potentially into early next week, we may see these develop on both sides of the country, both east and west. As always, I appreciate you guys watching this video. We'll be sure to keep you updated on this unfolding situation of tropical systems, and I'll catch you in the next forecast tomorrow.